Peace and love, you beautiful wonders with a spiritual level of being. Nathan here from a spiritual level of being, and you have a spiritual level of being. And today we're going to be discussing the early church father heretic hunters. Now, about 2 years ago, I did a video on the heresy hunting church fathers. So this is the same sort of thing, but a cleaner version of it. Much neater and a little bit different, as 2 years is a long time for someone else to gain knowledge. Now, let's put it this way. The ones who wrote the Bible that we have today were powerful politicians, Christian theologians, and scholars that allowed and accepted the use of persecutions towards other Christian groups, even written by heresy hunters, such as St. Irenaeus, which is the reason we only have 4 Gospels. Before this, we had multiple different texts that were accepted by various different Christian communities that would even favour certain texts and would share them around. Now, the very first complete Christian Bible contained no Old Testament, as it rejected it. It was written by Marcion, who rejected the idea of a punishing, jealous God, as did the early Christians. So this role was eventually swapped into what we call Satan. Now, Marcion stated this: "The God of the Old Testament is not the God of the New Testament." Marcion also said the first God is one who applies the law and punishes, whereas the other is a God of love who always forgives. Now, it's because of Origen, who was an early church father, Christian theologian and scholar, who came up with the idea that there are not 2 gods, that there's only one God, and he is fair and just and also loving. So because of this, the jealousy and the punishing and the evil shit basically was contributed to Satan, though not all of it, as you can still see the Bible is a mess of things. Now, there were many different types of Jewish beliefs. Before this, Canaanites had various different beliefs as well, as the Jews come from the Canaanite culture. Now, the Elohim were a council of gods, El being the father god, Yahweh being a lesser warrior and storm god, who was worshipped by other Canaanite groups who went out raiding and even sea people such as the Philistines. And it was recorded in ancient Egypt that Yahweh was a sea raiding god, basically. Well, not just sea raiding, but those who went out raiding, basically. Now, the loving idea was El. These 2 gods were mixed in, as the Israelites couldn't solve all their problems through raiding and war, as they were also getting their ass kicked. So they applied these 2 gods. Now, you had other views of this. The view of El. Some didn't believe that he was father of multiple different gods, but rather that it was just one unknowable God. So you had different elements of belief. Now, the Essenes, who worshipped the unknowable father, basically, similar to Gnosticism, that they would even refer to as El. Now, some Essenes believed that El had children. So again, different types of Essenes. So one of his children in the Essene belief was Yahweh. Some Canaanites believed Jesus was Yahweh in the flesh and his father was El. So again, multiple different theologies. Now you had the Gnostics, which would have also come from the Gentiles and some Essene groups who had Gnostic ways of thinking, which evolved into Gnostic Christians. Now these groups are the earliest of Christianity, which are the more peaceful groups, though Essenes were more stricter, where in Gnosticism it was more about searching for the mysteries to understand them, to be like Christ yourself. Now with the Essenes, you had to fast out in the wilderness, you had to be circumcised, you had to be a Jew first. So there were many rules, where the Gnostics didn't have this. The only rules were if you were going to be a bishop or, say, a Christian leader, was to be able to read and write and to be able to see. Now, many elements were removed out of Christianity and also Judaism, such as the goddess. So God being both the masculine and femme, the idea of Mother Earth. Now, this was ultimately removed in order to remove the role of women, to make it more male-dominated. The use of cannabis was also recorded by the ancient Israelites, even Gnostics that would inhale the fumes in order to receive divine visions or divine insight. Now, this was also in the holy oil that Jesus told his disciples to rub on those that were sick. Now, again, this was also removed, especially in Christianity. Now, it's argued that women were amongst the first farmers as well, and they were growing hemp, cannabis, and this in turn evolved into goddess worship. So it's interesting when we see these sort of roles. So they ultimately removed the role of women. Now, in early Christianity, women were also leaders, and they were about achieving the Christ within, so universally, both the male and the female. So this belief was ultimately removed and pushed out of Christianity. Now, this goes for vegetarianism, which was also common amongst the Essenes and Gnostics, some of which were even pescatarian. We had Canaanite groups that were vegetarian and others that were pescatarian. Now, when the Romans and Greeks become Christian, they brought in their diet, such as meat, wine. Now, some Essenes and even Canaanites rejected the use of alcohol. Some Christians did too. So again, we had these multiple different groups of different beliefs that unfortunately were persecuted due to the growing influence of the Roman Church. Now, Eusebius, who was in the era of Constantine, who became the first Christian Roman emperor of Rome. Some argue that he wasn't actually a Christian, was a secret sun god worshipper, or even a part of the Mithras cult. Now, because of this, one version of Christian was in his ear, so one version of Christianity. He didn't understand that there were multiple different versions of Christianity, and Constantine was quite shocked to find that there were multiple different beliefs of Christianity during the Council of Nicaea. Now, when they were choosing what was in canon, there were 11 different councils, not just the Council of Nicaea, that would choose what would be accepted as canon and what would be removed or rejected from their Bible. That was put together in the 4th century. So we have writings such from the Essenes and Gnostics that are much, much older, and we could have much more, but unfortunately the Catholic Church went off destroying them, and later on would be in the form of the Catholic Church trying to buy them into their private collections to hide them from the public. So it's lucky that we have the Nag Hammadi Library that was discovered. It's lucky that we have the Gospel of Judas or even the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, again, people would go out of their way to even make forgeries to try and discredit these sort of texts, which is a real shame. Now, the Catholic Church ridiculed the first person that translated the Nag Hammadi Library. So it's interesting when we see this because it's a control mechanism. So the Church's way of not just controlling your belief, but they want to control how you believe. Now, the Roman Church and the Catholics and Orthodox, they went around using heresy hunters to wipe out the Gnostics and who they considered pagan. But they didn't just stop there. They were stealing their knowledge of science, medicine, astrology, philosophy, and destroying it and keeping some of it for themselves. So this way, you had to pay a priest to heal you. So in the medieval ages, a lot of priests were doctors because of this reason. They had the knowledge because they hoarded it. Now, another thing is, with reading and writing, you had to send your child off to a monastery to learn how to read and write if you were poor. If you were richer, you could hire a priest to teach your child how to read and write. Now, at one stage, they banned women from being able to read and write, and even to be able to paint. Now, the Gnostics went around teaching people how to read and write, and most of which were teaching them how to read their own Bibles, which brought the anger of the Catholic Church, and also because they rejected the Pope. They didn't believe anyone had the right to control how you believe. They also rejected you having to go and pay a priest to confess your sins, or even going up to him to confess your sins, as this is only God alone can forgive, as God is within you. So you have your own connection to the divine. As the Church didn't want this, they wanted you to have a relationship with the Church, and only the Church. Now, the Gnostics were driven underground. So when they were driven underground and re-emerged, they re-emerged with other theologies. So you had different groups of Gnosticism because of this. Now, the Catholic Church was even hunting those of which who rejected meat. But there was a way around this. So you could do it for basically compassion reasons, but not because you rejected God's creation. Otherwise, you're considered a heretic and you were killed. Now, this is because they didn't want you to be able to go back to the older theologies. Now, again, this is for total control. So they considered what is holy and what is not, and you had no say in this at all. Now, many of which of Gnostics that were condemned and hunted even pretended to be, say, Catholic or Orthodox, so that way they wouldn't be killed. This was also done in Islam, as Islam was going around persecuting Gnostics and other religions as well, such as Zoroastrianism, and even the Mandaeans, who worship today, follow John the Baptist instead of Jesus, as they see him as the main prophet, basically. So they're a type of Gnostic groups. So they worship what they consider the unknowable God, and with masculine and feminine aspects. So their belief is also altered, say, to what it used to be. So we have insights from their religion, and from that insight we're able to understand what the Essenes were like, as we also see Essene elements as they're offshoot of an Essene movement. So again, we had many different theologies of what would be considered Christian or Gnosticism or even Essene. Now, Jesus recorded families or descendants. They were recorded as Jewish Christians by the Roman Christians, so a different theology. Now, this is because Jesus' family were Essene Christians, Jewish Christians. Now, James the Just, who was the leader of the Essenes. Now, in the Bible and other Christian texts, it states that Jesus stated that James is to be the next leader. Now, James was the head figure of the Christian movement, though there were other leaders such as the other members of Jesus' family, the disciples, and Mary Magdalene. So these would be in charge of the Gentiles, and later on this role would be shifted to Simon Magus, who some consider even to be Paul. Now, I'm one for this as well, as I see the story of Paul being allied with Simon Magus and a little bit of Marcion. So the story has been shifted that we don't even know the actual story because of change in editing. Now, the thing here with Jesus' disciples and family, they had their own views. So after James' death, the movement split into the Essenes and Nazareans and Ebionites. So some scholars consider them all the same movement, but again, different theologies. So because of their different opinions, we had different forms of Christianity. Now, the problem was Jesus didn't write his own stuff, so a lot of stuff was written after his death. Some argue that there were stuff written during his lifetime, but if we do have them, they've been destroyed by, let's say, the Catholic and Orthodox and even the Roman Church and the Romans themselves. Now, another little hint is the naming of ancient Christians of what they referred to themselves as. The poor ones, Essenes. Good Christians, Gnostics. Good men and women, Gnostics. Now, again, these are the earliest forms of Christianity. So these of which were the more peaceful groups. Now, Gnosticism is the most peaceful of which out of all of them, as they have never persecuted, they have never forced their beliefs on anyone, and their message is ultimately unconditional love and to be like Christ themselves. So a similar message to Buddhism, to be like Buddha yourself. So the same concept. Now, again, because it's your own personal relationship with the divine, your own progression, not in control of the church, it was ultimately mostly stamped out. Thankfully, it's returning today. Another thing is, whenever they find new Christian scriptures, it takes years for them to decipher. And when they do decipher, it's slow to be released to the public. And that's because the controversy. They don't want any contradictions. So usually when they discover a Christian text, they're quick to jump on the bandwagon saying that it's a forgery. And this is beforehand of even researching into it. Again, because the fear, because the Vatican have learnt their lesson from just straight up jumping on stuff. Now, this is not just because of forgeries, but this is because of the contradictions to their said religion, and they don't want you to know this. Now, the top figures of Christianity, the ones that control Christian media, the ones that control the field of archaeological evidence of Christianity, were even busted for lying about certain things and for doing illegal tomb smuggling, Hobby Lobby. So because of this, new evidence has been brought forth that contradicts their said faiths. So it's interesting that we're seeing the new development now that religion is losing control. And now we have new scholars saying that the Gnostics were the oldest form of Christianity, that they're in fact the ones whose writings were more correct, as the other ones were considered now by some scholars, so the Bible we have today, considered to be forgeries of made up by priests basically to settle theological debates. Now, another thing is, amongst the earliest Christian beliefs, the virgin birth was rejected. And because of this, anyone who had this belief was ultimately killed. The idea of Christ being within you. There were even some that believed so far that Jesus didn't actually exist, but it was the Christ figure that you should achieve, that it was your goal to achieve. Now, there were Gnostics and Christians that believed that Jesus was a regular human, that achieved divine knowledge, or that was, say, adopted by God. This was an Essene belief, being adopted. So adoptedism. Now, these beliefs were stamped out as they viewed them as being rejecting the word of God. Now, another thing that was also rejected was the belief of God being both masculine and femme. So this was stamped out because a male-dominated society didn't like the role of women stepping up, and also because there were Christians that were starting to worship Mary Magdalene. So they started to replace statues of Mary Magdalene with statues of the Virgin Mary. Now, this is all done for reasons, to controlled the religion, as I said, to control the people's mind. Total control system. Where Gnosticism was about liberating, searching for answers yourself, your own personal relationship, to be the best version of you that you can be, to be a good person. Now, there were even Jewish people that were even persecuted because of they believed that they were responsible for Jesus' death because they removed the role of the Romans, when ultimately it was the Romans' fault for what they did to Jesus. Now, because Christianity became a controlled religion by the Romans and was adopted into the Roman culture, the beliefs shifted and blames shifted towards the Jews. Now, there are Christians that were kicked out as they couldn't tell the difference between the Jews and Christians. This is the Romans. But they allowed some Christians to stay as they didn't blame them for Jesus' death. They blamed the Jews. So they were allowed to stay. Now, the Catholic Church wasn't just destroying what they considered Gnostic or a slightly different version of Christianity or even, say, paganism books. They were also destroying anything that contradicts Christianity. They were even destroying philosophy, anything to do with science. So, again, the reason why they were burning science, you can label that as a contradiction to their belief. Now, this was to suppress and control the people. Now, the philosophy that was destroyed would be insightful stuff that will make the individual think. Say, if the writer questioned Christianity or even favoured some viewpoints but seen it as incomplete, it was destroyed. Christianity even went so far as destroying libraries. Islam has done this too. Judaism has gone around persecuting its own people as well. All religions have basically done this. Now, all religions change. Now, another thing I want to mention here is the contradictions that were destroyed were early contradictions, dating from the 2nd century, possibly 1st century even. Now, we still have some that have survived today, but ultimately it's lucky that they have survived. So, one thing I want to mention is the Gnostics. They haven't persecuted anyone. So I see them as one of the purest insights. Now, that's because it's a philosophy. It's not to be taken as a religion, as it's a spiritual path. Now, there is a religious side to Gnosticism, but that was due to those who were unable to understand the deeper meanings that took the stories literally and not symbolically. Now, you can argue this with Christianity, as a lot of them take it all literally and are unable to see the symbolic meanings. So peace and love, everyone. I love you all. Connect to one mind and soul. Namaste.